Hey everyone, Dan here, and welcome to what will now be called What's the Hold Up? Special thanks to Jamie Howard for giving me the idea to rename this when I was disappointed to find out that Does It Hold Up was already taken and was an active podcast, such as show business. So this is going to officially be episode 1. And what we're going to do is talk a little bit about what I want to get out of this show. We're going to talk a little bit about what brought me here and why I'm doing it. And then we're going to push for my review, my thoughts, spend some time on the movie Vision Quest, a movie that I have adored for a really long time. Or thought I adored. I think that's a better thing to say. I shouldn't say adored. Let's talk about it as a movie I thought I adored and is really the impetus for what's the holdup? Does it hold up? Did it hold up? What was the holdup of that film? Hence the new title of the podcast, which I think is relatively unique. So let's talk first about how I decided I really wanted to do this. And I think the Vision Quest story about getting that on a different podcast, which is going to get a free shout out for the very few of you that ever listen to this. Maybe someday I'll have an audience. But let's talk a little bit about what led me to there and then what brought up the idea of I think this would be a really interesting podcast topic. And not the least of which is just I'm the type of guy whose brain is running 900 miles an hour all the time. So I really wanted to start a podcast, have a show, do something where I could get these thoughts out, at least around minor things like pop culture and things of that nature. There'll be some serious thoughts in here, I'm sure, every now and again. But the idea was just to have a place to get these goofy thoughts out of my head. And maybe, as I said, I'm going to probably see if I can't get a guest in the next week or two. I'm trying to drop one of these a week. Get them out on Monday nights, Tuesday mornings, try to get a better cadence, all those types of things. So let's talk about the history of me getting Vision Quest on big screen sports with Kyle Banduho. If you're not listening to that podcast, I'd be shocked if you're somebody who's going to listen to my podcast, if you're not listening to that one. But Kyle, I discovered via the fact that he started doing these Ted Lasso podcast reviews. I think it was all during COVID. And I saw people like Alex McDaniel, who helped him push to do Ted Lasso. I came in, I started listening to that. I'd been watching Ted Lasso. I really enjoyed it. I realized he had a podcast about sports movies. I'm listening to podcasts while I work throughout the day. I enjoy movies. I am somebody who's especially a sucker for sports movies. And I started listening to his podcast. And I listened to it for probably about a year, joined his Patreon, all of those types of things. And funny enough, and I'm trying to remember who it was, but there was a guest on. They were talking about the movie Youngblood, which is a hockey movie starring a very young Rob Lowe. And they were talking about kind of the coming of age elements of it and how it was a sport about youth hockey. And in that moment, something just clicked for me about how I really wanted them to do Vision Quest on the show. And I figured out that if I joined the Patreon, I would become somebody who could nominate movies and get films on the list and see if people would vote for them. And I started on what became I don't even remember now. This is about 3 years ago. At least a 4, if not 6 or 7 month journey to get Vision Quest loaded up onto Big Screen Sports Patreon for them to review. And to talk about why, let's dive into a little bit of my background. I think people who know me from online have probably seen this or have seen me talk about it, but the sport that I've always identified with the most, way more so than college football or anything else, is freestyle and folk style high school Olympic wrestling. I started wrestling when I was 10. I was a kid that did not have a ton of self-confidence. I actually had a lot of athletic potential, but didn't believe myself to be athletic. And in 6th grade, I might have been 11 at that point. I was maybe 11 going on 12. In 6th grade, we had a new teacher come in who became the high school wrestling coach, even though he was a middle school teacher. I went to a small private school. And he started recruiting people to wrestle. And I was like, I'll give it a shot. I wanted something to do. My parents did, especially my dad, encourage participating in sports. I was a horrific basketball player. Couldn't play football yet. And I was like, well, I'll give this wrestling thing a try. And I don't know, it just clicked for me. I think because with things like weight classes and all of that type of stuff, it didn't matter how big you are. You're going to wrestle other guys your size, right? So you could be a really big guy. You could be a really little guy. You could be an in-between guy. There's advantages to being tall. There's advantages to being short. It just depends on what you want to do. You can turn your athleticism or lack thereof, or your certain physical attributes into an advantage if you learned how to use them. So there was that part of it. The second part of it, and this goes in when I start talking about Vision Quest, this will come back around. So the thing I always liked about wrestling was that it was me versus the other guy. And you were going to win or you were going to lose. And sometimes you were going to win or you were going to get beat. And what I mean by the difference there was sometimes, and I think this is an important life lesson lots of people could have more of, and you see it in college football and other team sports, but I think wrestling really makes it personal to you, and you learn how to survive these things. Because sometimes you are going to go out there and you are going to give it your all, and you're going to put everything into it, every ounce of effort, every bit of will, every bit of heart, and it will not be enough. The guy across from you is Alabama, and you are not. And that's just the way it is. And there's a humbleness to that, obviously, even when it's your best, if you learn how to deal with it. And then I will also say this, and it doesn't happen to everybody, but it happened to me. And maybe this is why it was significant to me. Because the other thing you will get out of wrestling is sometimes you are that other guy's Alabama. You are that other guy's Crimson Tide, that other guy's Ohio State. And he is some poor school showing up to get his paycheck. And you learn, I think, with good coaches and good people in your life, how to handle that power, how to handle that responsibility that you might have beat him at that point in time, but you are not a better person. It does not say anything about you morally. It does not say anything about your worth to society or whatever else. And yet in the same moment, physically winning a contest against another person feels good, and it's okay for it to feel good. Part of my wrestling journey as well is I was okay in middle school. My parents get divorced in 8th grade. I lose all my confidence, right? I already didn't have a ton of confidence. There's lots of stories and other stuff. Someday we might get into them on this podcast about my first many years in Columbus. The funnest story I had is one you can find on the full cast Christmas Disasters episode. The funniest thing that happened to me in my first 3 years involved my dad shooting himself in the leg on Christmas Day. I was standing in the room. That's the funny story, right? It was a shitty few years. But I'm trying to make it work. I'm trying to find these things. But I get to my freshman year of high school, and I go 0-20. I didn't play football my freshman year. Well, that's going to pick up on the mic where I just bumped it with my damn headphones. I go like 0-20. I didn't play football. I didn't do anything. My parents had gotten divorced the summer between 8th and 9th grade. And what I ended up doing was sitting on my butt, playing video games, feeling sorry for myself, eating. And hey, lots of people do that. If that's your jam, I'm not judging. But what happened to me is I went from a kid who was modestly athletic, still growing into his body, a little bit delayed, to a short little overweight kid who didn't feel good about himself, hadn't played football, everybody's picking on me. I am like a 5'5" kid who had to wrestle at 171 pounds, and none of that was muscle. And I go and I have my wrestling season, and I don't win any matches, but I finish that year. And actually, I was having to weigh in my clothes so I could be heavy enough to still wrestle at my weight class. Because as the year went on and as I went to practice and I stayed consistent, I ended up losing so much weight that it was actually hard for me to wrestle at my weight class. And just very quick rules: you're not allowed to wrestle more than 2 weight classes above what your actual weigh-in weight class is, right? So I'm trying to remember. So I'm like having to make sure I weigh 153 pounds. Now remember, I actually had to lose a little bit of weight to wrestle at 171 at the start of the season. Now I'm having to like wear clothes and do other stuff so I can make sure I actually weigh. I'm weighing in my shoes so I can weigh 153 pounds, so I can be above the 152 weight class. So, or maybe I have to weigh 146. The point of the story is I've like lost this weight. I'm gaining confidence about myself. I'm still not winning any matches, but it just helped. Then I come back for my sophomore year, and I promise this is all going somewhere, not just trying to pour out my life story. I come back for my sophomore year. I play football, so I actually stay. I stay somewhat in shape. I get back in shape through football season. It was an interesting year because my team that year was loaded with seniors. We're playing single A ball in Georgia. It's nothing super special, but we go all the way to the state semifinals, and I'm just a backup on the team. I'm on practice squad, if you will. I'm getting beat up, but we're working. I'm playing against these guys. We're getting a little bit better. Come into wrestling season just skinnier, ready to go. And what happens then, even though I weigh like I could have wrestled 140, the 140 and 145 pounders on our team are both returning state champions, and much better than me. Like, it's not like, oh, Dan will contend for this. So I have to wrestle up at 152. It's nice I don't have to cut weight. I'm staying there pretty naturally, so that made that a little bit more enjoyable. But now I'm still way above where I should be on my weight class. 152 is a little bit murderer's row in Georgia for whatever reason at that point in time. Like, it's a place where you can get short, really strong guys. So I just got worked over, but I ended up winning some matches, gaining some confidence. So junior year, senior year, wrestle a lot better, get to wrestle more at my natural weight class, have some runs. I'm okay. If I ever look back on any like regret I have in my life, it was that I didn't wrestle with more confidence. You know, there's a lot of, I'm sure other people have these. If I could go back and do then with what I know now, what would that be like? And a big one for me is with my fully realized competitive streak and self-confidence and belief in myself and willingness to push and other things, what would my wrestling career have been like if I'd had that version of Dan? But at the same time, maybe I'm not this version of Dan without that version of Dan. So there you go. I probably too much background, but I just wanted to dive into what wrestling meant to me, why I liked it, why it mattered. And, you know, one of the nice things too is it's still in a way its own team sport, just because you do get to be part of a team. You're with the squad. You're doing all the stuff that guys in high school do in terms of giving each other grief and traveling and doing road trips. And it was, especially wrestling tournaments, you did a lot of that. I have fun. First time I ever got drunk in my life was after a wrestling tournament, my senior year of high school. We were, you know, I don't know, I had like a beer and a half probably. And I probably wasn't even that drunk, but I felt drunk. I'd never known what it felt like. But anyway, all those memories. So wrestling's important. I think the second thing to say for a lot of people, it's one of those sports where I will say, you play football, you play basketball. You are a basketball player, you are a football player. Wrestling follows more into that. You swim, you golf, you wrestle, you run. There's just an identity almost right there in the name. Don't know why that happened. One of those interesting vagaries of English, but it is like an identity a bit, right? And I said this, I'd get into this in a moment. I got to be on a little kind of sub mini episode of Kyle's podcast talking about wrestling. And there's just a special kind of fucked up in the head that wrestlers have. So there you go. Setting the groundwork. I have that. It's how I identify. I still think about it to this day. I am 47 friggin' years old. I have not wrestled in a real wrestling match now in almost literally 30 years. Obviously goofed around in college, done other things, but I never went back and wrestled again. So why does it still matter to me? Why this is 3 years ago now, so why when I'm 44 do I really want this podcast I enjoy to cover Vision Quest? Why did it stick out to me? Let's talk about that, and then we're going to spend 15, 20 minutes talking about Vision Quest, and we will wrap up the very inaugural episode of What's the Holdup, talking about that. So, why did it matter to me? Well, one, wrestlers don't get any damn movies. They're just not many. I don't know why. It's actually really interesting. We talked about this a little bit. It's actually it's a cinematic sport. It shoots well. It involves, really kind of only two people. You can get a lot of different angles. You can do some other stuff. People can really go at it without potentially getting hurt, unlike, say, boxing movies or martial arts movies. But for whatever reason, there's not many wrestling movies, right? You have Vision Quest. You have Foxcatcher, which is wrestling's not the main character. Yes, it's about wrestlers, but it's also a true story. So in and of itself, you're like, this is all kind of weird. These are weird people. I cannot remember the name of it now. There's a movie with Paul Giamatti where he is a struggling high school wrestling coach and a lawyer, and he kind of suckers in this kid who's a really, really, really talented wrestler for a bunch of really bad reasons. And it's one of those indie flicks that is actually really pretty good. It's kind of one of Paul Giamatti's indie flicks. He's not doing it for a paycheck. He's doing it because he liked the story. God damn, it's going to drive me nuts that I can't remember that. And I'm not at a place where I'm going to live look stuff up. Win-Win. That was the name of it. It was just Win/Win. That was the name of the movie. Anyway, so you don't have a lot. And you especially didn't have a lot. So I named that. So two of those movies I just named were long after I had graduated from high school. They were after I graduated from college. So you basically have Vision Quest, and then any other wrestling movie you have, in honor of last week's 0.5 episode, features professional wrestlers. And shit, in that era, it was still even before Kurt Angle and other actual real wrestlers were showing up and coming into the sport. I mean, some of those guys could, legit shoot wrestle and were legit grapplers and stuff and tough, but you didn't have, it was not real wrestling, right? So there was not really any real wrestling movies, and you haven't really had, even I'm in high school, I think you get one of your first UFC bouts. You start to see a little bit about grappling there, right? Because Hoist Gracie wins the first couple of those. Dan Severn is actually really good in a couple of them as well. So you're starting to realize, what grappling can be, but no one's making movies about this. So what did we have? What did we have for our representation, right? There's a million boxing movies. There's football and baseball and basketball, and they're all great, but wrestlers didn't have any movies. We had Vision Quest. And I think what I'll use this to talk about is when you don't have a lot of representation, you can kind of over-elevate the bit of representation that you get. And Vision Quest is definitely that. So it was really funny because I'm pushing every month. I'm nominating in the Patreon group for Vision Quest to show up. It's getting close to winning. Other people are talking about how excited they are, how much they also enjoyed Vision Quest. It's just a few folks. We're pushing all the time. I'm teasing Kyle on Twitter, trying to make it go. We're actually starting to have banter and back and forth about it. It's like my thing. I got a thing I'm carrying for this movie, Vision Quest, because it's the only wrestling movie I ever knew. And the irony is we finally get it, and I sit down and I was like, well, hell, I have not actually watched Vision Quest in 30 years. I had not seen it since I was a high school wrestler. I just remember it fondly. I remember the story of it. I remember some question marks I have about it, but I need to sit down now that they're actually going to do this movie, and I need to watch it. And and I don't know if some of this was the TBS effect. I'm pretty sure I bought it on VHS, watched it one time, maybe. So I take that back. I might have seen it in college, but it had been early, when I was starting a movie collection. I watched it maybe once or twice, realized now that I look back on it, the only good parts are the wrestling parts. And even then we'll talk about that in a moment. But boy, are there some aspects of that movie I really fucking memory hold. And I mean, it's been 3 years. I did not rewatch for this. I watched some clips on YouTube. There's some great clips on YouTube, but those are the best parts of the movie. You don't get the weird shit. You do not get the bizarre, horny teenager stuff. And I'm not going to relitigate it. You know, I'd love to send people. I think it's always great. Go listen to Kyle's podcast. There's an episode on it. Poor Caroline Darney is just so obviously traumatized when she comes into the episode because she had just finished watching it. Because I'll just say this. Damn it, I bumped the mic again. I'll just say this. The movie really clearly leans into its general Porky's was just this weird success. Everybody is like these coming of age teens are coming into their sexual identity movies. So let's add in those elements into this story about Loudon Swain and his quote-unquote vision quest. And you could call the vision quest cultural appropriation, but the cultural appropriation is written into the story, and the guy has to deal with it, and there's some other great stuff in that. And I'm not sure how much time I'm going to really spend, like, breaking down the film, right? Like, I guess I'll say this. For people who haven't seen it, Vision Quest is the story of a high school wrestler who is a bit of a prodigy. He's portrayed by Matthew Modine. I think it is pre-Full Metal Jacket. They're right around the same time. And Matthew Modine sort of being presented, it's just him and his dad. His mom's left them. They're living in some part of Washington State, maybe Spokane. It's not Seattle, right? They're not in the big city. I think it's kind of implied his dad's a farmer. They're not, they're a little poor. Mom's left them. Kind of got that story. Loudon was pretty good. He kind of surprisingly wrestled. I think he was a sophomore, and he was sort of a surprise. He'd never wrestled before, so he's supposed to be kind of like this kind of prodigy wrestler. And then there's this kid named Shoot, Brian Shoot. So it's his last name, right? And Brian Shoot is the guy. Probably the best pound for pound guy in the state. And here's where you get into other things that doesn't hold up really well, especially in the movie. So the point of the movie is, what's his vision quest, right? So Loudon decides, yes, it would be one thing to win state, but it would be another thing as this relative newcomer, but who's very gifted, to go wrestle and beat Brian Shoot. The problem is he is 20 plus pounds bigger than Shoot, and he's already relatively lean, right? So part of the vision quest is him doing all of this work and everything else going on for him to cut the weight, get down, and be able to wrestle Brian Shoot, right? That's big. Can he hold up? Can he make it? How much longer can he hack it? All he wants is that one night. And we'll talk about the one night and what happens in 6 minutes in my, yes, that part holds up. So that's the general story. So it's mirrored against he's got this vision, this thing he wants to do. What they add into the movie story is that this young lady kind of comes to stay with them on her way to going to San Francisco to become a professional artist. She has to stop off and earn a little more money before she can make it and do that. And Loudon is, of course, smitten with her because she is very, very attractive, and he is a very horny 17-year-old boy. And I'm going to actually pull this up because what is that? What is her? Linda Fiorentino. So if from Men in Black, from some other stuff, if you remember her. So anyway, it becomes about he wants to trade in, as dudes would say, especially in this era, he wants to punch his V card. He would like to do it with the girl that's living with them, but is it a distraction from his vision quest to wrestle Shoot? So it's actually like, if she wasn't so much older and if he wasn't such a creep during some parts of the movie, I think it's actually a really interesting story. It was based on a novel, a coming of age novel, same kind of thing. But that story, that premise, I think is relatively strong. But like I said, I think never really researched. I did a bit of research for this, but I never found it. I think there was a lot of kind of studio interference, as you would expect at that point in time, It's also just a very movie of its time, in the way it's edited, the way it's shot, um, the way they tell the story. There's just certain things about it that you just, I don't think you want to forgive, because I think it was creepy in 1983, 84 as it is today. But, sadly, society had a broader tolerance for the creepiness. So that's, what's the holdup on that? It just doesn't. Like, sadly, I think something that could be really strong didn't hold up well at all. The story could be told so much better. I think it could be so much more interesting, including the love story aspect of it. I do think coming of age and young men, all the shit we're dealing with in society right now, I think, talking about that in healthy, productive ways would be, could be a really good story. And maybe as we say that in the light of kind of today, it's one of those situations where it just never made sense that she was so into him. I never got why she was into him, why she agreed to sleep with him, the infatuations on either side, right? Because what's funny about it is, in a lot of ways, Matthew Modine was perfect, because Loudon's supposed to be sort of this nerdy, heady kind of kid who's also a writer and all these other things. And, he's also just a gifted wrestler. So, it's not like, even by those standards, Matthew Modine he's an actor. He's not a bad looking guy, but, he's not Hollywood handsome, right? Doesn't look like Shoot. So that piece doesn't hold up, could be done better. Even if you grade it on a curve from the time it came out, doesn't work. But it's weird because there's a movie in the movie here, which is all about the wrestling side of it. And that's the side of the film that I think I'll say, even as sports movies go, for the most part, does hold up. I mean, it's somewhat predictable. They made a choice when the movie, so this is something I found in my research. I've never read the book. I've sometimes been tempted to go back and find it. But what is interesting in the book is the book ends on Loudon and Shoot shaking hands, and the ref blows the whistle to start the match, right? Very classic journey before destination storytelling. Works in a novel. I get why they put the wrestling match into the movie and why they made it so Loudon wins. I think it would have been better if he hadn't won. I think in him learning to accept defeat is an opportunity that they had with the movie, but it's the 80s. Weirdly enough, not a lot of people learned the lesson from Rocky that the protagonist doesn't actually have to win, that it was about lasting against Creed. And to, paraphrase what happens in this movie with the great speech, it's not about the 6 minutes, it's about what happens in those 6 minutes. So get it, it holds up. So, but the wrestling, the thing that I think makes it stick with me even all these years later, despite the flaws, despite the fact that, and I'll talk about the physical wrestling here in a minute, because I have rewatched some clips kind of coming into this, they still get it at its core right. Like, they really capture the general special way that wrestlers are kind of fucked up in the head. And just what it's like being at wrestling practice, what wrestling coaches are like. If they catch you shooting the shit and goofing off, you get to be the dummy. They just got all of that. The general miserableness of cutting weight and how hard that is on you physically and mentally. I wonder sometimes as I sit here and think about it as I'm talking about it, did the movie set some bad examples that unfortunately had to be dealt with, thought about in, creating a culture where people thought they had to cut all of this weight. I mean, I had lots of friends who did it. I had a coach who did it. He was a alternate for the 96 U.S. Olympic team. What he would do for weight cuts was insane, but he was at least a whole ass adult. So it did maybe set a tone for that as I think about it. Even one of those realizations you have while you're recording one of these things. But it just did capture the spirit of what wrestlers are like, what Shoot is like. let's talk a little bit about what didn't hold up. And one's the obvious one, and it's in the trivia. You can go look it up on IMDb. You can tell now if you just watch under today's standards. So the funniest thing in the whole wide world is any sort of notion that Matthew Modine is like 20 pounds heavier than Brian Shute. I think he's supposed to be cutting from 190 to 168 or something like that. There's just no way. And they could have actually solved that with some better blocking in the movie, because the only thing you needed to do was basically, and this happens in wrestling a lot. Why is Matthew Modine 190? I don't know. You make him like 6'3". And why is Brian Shute only 168? I don't know. You make him built like a brick shit house, but he's only 5'7". And that's super common. Like it's a short man friendly sport. It's actually a sport where being short in your weight class can kind of be an advantage. So they could have done that. But so that's obvious thing number one. There's just no way that Matthew Modine is the bigger guy. That's actually, like, they knew that. They decided Shute looked so good. He was a wrestler. He was kind of a classic. It's kind of like you happen in some of these Jackie Chan movies and stuff. I think he was there to train the wrestlers, and they looked at him and were like, "Yeah, you're Brian Shute," which is perfect. He just looks like a wrestler. So you have that piece. So that doesn't hold up, but that's okay. Well, movie making, a lot of people won't know these types of things when they think about it. But second thing, this was interesting. I really put a critical eye on this, kind of prepping for this, wanting to revisit this. And I went and watched some YouTube clips. I did a couple other things. There's just some moments where the wrestling's not great. And that would be okay, except these are supposed to be two of the best guys in the state. And there's just some things that I feel like they could have fixed with probably a better advisor and some better, more prep time maybe in the whole thing. And it is kind of odd and a little off-putting to notice it. It's kind of feels like when you watch those clips on YouTube and you see a magician talk about like how poor a magic trick is in a movie, or just the general cheat that they're acting like there's a magic trick and then they just use a cut to hide the sleight of hand or whatever else. Or funny enough, just because it came up today on Blue Sky, and I would have never have noticed this as I hadn't watched it with a bunch of stuntmen, but I'm going to ruin in certain ways the awesomeness of the throne room fight scene from The Last Jedi. Watch that scene and pay attention to how many of those poor stuntmen in the background had to stand around because they got overambitious with the choreography for two people who were not martial artists. Between Daisy Ridley and Adam Driver. So you will know there's people just doing random shit in the background because they're not fighting Jackie Chan. And when you got enough of an eye and you're educated enough to look for that, you'll notice it. So the wrestling doesn't hold up. The individual moves, you can tell they drilled those. You can tell they drilled things like a lateral throw, head and arm, fireman's carry. But the way they get linked together, the fact that Loudon is supposed to be this guy who was almost a state champion his first year, so he's so good, and his top position ground game is just fucking just execrable. It's terrible. Sorry, you can't be that much of a supposed stud if you can't hold a guy down for 3 damn seconds. Just nothing. He had no moves. It was terrible. His escape game is not great either. And it didn't help that they kept shooting in slow motion places where you're like, yeah, that doesn't work. Like if he turns that way, Shute just squeezes, bear hugs him and takes him right back down to the mat. So it's just some weird little things like that. Turns his head into the half Nelson. Just shit they teach you your first day of wrestling when you're in 5th fucking grade. Don't do that. Just stuff like that bothers me. So when I come back to what's the holdup, I have to say they get everything outside of the wrestling matches right, and I think that makes the story but the story work well. But then the wrestling doesn't work, and I think that hurts. So I don't know. I'm not gonna probably do this podcast with I'm not the type of guy. I'm a big full cast listener, as people know. I need like very little structure, and it's okay if I have notes and then completely forget to look at them. So I'm not going to have categories. I'm not going to give it a real rating. But what I'll talk about is like, as a GT fan, I do also understand the concept of grading on a curve. And Vision Quest gets a very special curve because it's still one of the only wrestling movies that's about wrestling and a wrestler. Wrestling's the main character, if you will, of the movie. That the identity and the things that go along with that and why we put ourselves through it's that. So I'll give it a special place in the pantheon of wrestling movies because it sort of gets there by default. But there's still a lot that could be better and a lot of work that they could have done to make it a better movie. And I really would love, I think it would make an outstanding Netflix series or mini series. You could do it on Amazon Prime, whatever else, or even hell, just remake the movie. I think it'd work. I think it'd be great. I think it could still fit. I think you could do a lot. Wrestling's an interesting sport in terms of some of the things I talked about at the beginning and how it ties into masculinity because, you know, it is a physical combat sport, but at the same time, it involves being really, really close to each other. There's a lot of physical touching, being comfortable with that, being vulnerable emotionally and physically. I think it would be a really, really interesting remake made by the right people, cast the right way. I think you could leave the love story in it, but do so much better with it. And I think it's potentially even okay to have, 17, 18-year-old Loudon Swain into a 20-year-old girl. I don't think that's necessarily, that featured heavily in maybe my second favorite season of Shoresy. I think it can work if it's not creepy, because you're not talking about some obscene age gap. You're just talking about a slightly older woman, not a teacher, not something creepy, just slightly older, maybe a touch more experienced, and a guy making those steps forward, and you make that parallel with the sport and the activity and the drive and the trade-offs and the decisions we make in life. It was so close to being just a phenomenal movie. It's got a couple of great bits. It's the Lunatic Fringe section right before he wrestles shoots, still fantastic. Anybody who's ever been nervous before a match knows exactly what he's going through. So, wow, coming up on 38 minutes. You might have noticed I put a little theme song at the beginning. What the hell? Thought I'd try it. Thanks again to Jamie Howard for helping me come up with the What's the Hold Up title. I think that's pretty unique and I really like it and I'm going to stick with it. If you listened to this far, I really appreciate you sticking with me. Like I said, I'm going to try to get some guests going here. I got to figure out what I want to do next. One thing I've thought about, kind of weird to stick this right at the end. I bumped the fucking mic again. I'm going to get better at that. I promise. One of the things I've thought about is, I already ended up doing wrestling instead of a movie. I said I could do TV shows. I might watch a couple episodes of kids' cartoons. One of the other things I'm thinking about doing, I might try to figure out how to play small video games. Once again, I can't probably play them all the way through, but I think it'd be fun, right? Video games, remember from kids. So the point of this, in a what's the hold up sense, is gonna be, misplaced nostalgia. And I think it could be really fun to visit that with people in all kinds of different places, and then accurately placed nostalgia. The things that, I'm a dad, the things I'm looking forward to showing my kids that I think will hold up. And this will help me also be prepared for the things I loved as a kid that don't hold up. And that's part of the point. So once again, thanks for sticking with me. I kind of had a lot of fun chatting through this. This is going to be where you can find your podcasts. I probably should have put that type of shit at the beginning, but I'm still figuring out how to do this. I'll probably eventually do a little pre-recorded intro and just throw that in there. But thanks for sticking around. Thanks for listening to me blather about Vision Quest, a nearly 50-year-old movie that 5 people have seen, but means something to me. And you gave me a chance to think through why that was and share my story with you. And I appreciate you. And I hope you will come back another day and listen to the next episode.